We're going to now move into our first panel, I think. And the panel that we're going to go into now is on follow-on funding for fashion and textile businesses. Some of you will know one of the nicest things for me about the Future Fashion Factory is that I think we've evaluated something like 430 creative ideas since we began, and then we've co-funded a large number since that time. But what's really lovely is when you see those really early stage businesses go on to secure significant funding later on. So it's nice to feel that you did something right. And we have some of those success stories, I think, in the room today. I'm hoping the panel will kind of miraculously appear on my right-hand side. And here it is. So please do take your seats. I'd like to introduce the chair of the panel, Irene Maffini. Irene's an advisor at PDS Ventures, and Irene is an angel investor and startup operator who's dedicated her career to supporting mainly climate tech innovation. And she's got 14 years of experience investing and commercializing clean technologies along startups and Fortune 100 companies. Through her work, she's directly supported these companies to raise over 70 million in funding to advance their sustainable solutions. And currently, she serves as an angel investor and advisor at PDS Ventures, where she focuses on sustainability, circular economy models, and next generation materials, and has a direct involvement in some of those early stage companies that FFF assisted in the very beginning. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Irene and the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So, hi everyone. So today we will be discussing different type of funding that startups can raise to kind of fund their business. And I'm very excited to discuss this topic, which I think is very important, especially in this sector, and also to be here with two amazing companies, Materra and DyeRecycle, that you will hear from. And as a way of a kind of introduction, I spent my whole career in clean tech, and fashion is something that actually came in my radar only 5 years ago when I first invested in a company in this sector. And I soon realized that when you say fashion in the investor world, it's like a bad word, the same way that the clean tech was a bad word when I started my career. Because I don't know why, but people don't take seriously, the $3 trillion kind of fashion industry, which actually includes many sectors. So I feel like companies in this sector, both hardware and software, struggle more to raise funding than companies in other sectors that I've seen. In particular, I focus a lot of the work on hardware technologies, a lot of material technologies that normally take a lot of money and a long time to get to market. So it's quite hard, I think, to find the right investors that can be not just value aligned, but especially kind of timeline aligned and can be patient in the commercialization of a lot of these technologies. And I was trying to think who will be in the audience, and I imagine there will be researchers, startup founders, kind of innovators thinking about, or established businesses thinking about doing R&D and what type of funding are available to you. And normally speaking, you will start with grant funding in the UK. Luckily, we have Innovate UK. In Europe, a big funder is the ESC Accelerator, and they usually would get some grants, maybe some friends and family money or some small angel funding to really match the grant and build the first minimum viable product, reaching technology readiness level 4 or 5. Essentially, you prove something in a lab, and then you probably need a little bit more money, still, from grants and angels, accelerators, incubators, to basically give the product in the hands of the customers to start kind of breaking it. And at that point, when you kind of have a product market fit, you will probably raise a larger seed round, Series A rounds from institutional investors, being these family office, which tend to be quite active in the fashion space, venture capital funds, which tend to be financial generalist investors who might have some specific focus, in some segments of fashion like software, materials, kind of deep tech, and then strategic investors, and I work for one of them that usually invest their profits of their balance sheet or have a structured venture capital fund that operates sort of at arm's length. And we will be discussing this different type of funding in the context of DyeRecycle and Materra, why they focus on different investors and what have been the opportunities and the challenges also in the journey. So let's just jump in the discussion, and before we can start, maybe with some quick introduction from Aida and John. Yes, and then we can.
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name is Aida. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DyeRecycle. So I'm a chemical engineer by background. I have a PhD in chemical engineering. And DyeRecycle was founded 2 years ago, so it's quite a young company. And at DyeRecycle, we have developed a technology that separates dyes from fibers from textile waste. And in this way, we can basically recycle both the dyes and the fibers. So we're creating a circular economy for both chemical side of things as well as the fiber things. And this way, we are also creating a new category of sustainable dyes for the first time, which is the recycled synthetic dyes. And at the same time, the fibers that we have just removed the dyes from, they become much more valuable in the textile waste market because they become much more efficient in terms of the fiber recycling.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is John. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO of Materra. And Materra is an agtech company, and we're digitizing the base of the supply chain for fashion brands to enable the production of the most sustainable fiber for some of the world's biggest companies. And we started our journey in 2019. And well, I'll talk more about it in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, we can jump straight. Maybe, let's go with both of you through your kind of funding journey. And also, what were the key factors that you consider when you evaluate the different type of funding across it?
Well, we started in 2019. The investment landscape was quite different at the time, especially when it comes to fashion. And we raised, we started experimenting in South London in 2019 as a side project. And in 2020, we managed to raise a pre-seed round, really as COVID was kicking in, which was challenging for multiple reasons. But that allowed us to then go straight to India for 3 months to set up our first industrial facilities. And in the meantime, secured another sort of large contract with the H&M Group, which allowed us to then unlock a seed round in 2020, at the beginning of 2022. That seed round was co-led by 2 strategic investors, the H&M Group and Bestseller, that joined PDS Ventures, who invested in the pre-seed round, also a strategic investor. And we're now approaching Series A territory, given our commercialization of our services and our fiber. And I can talk about that more in a minute.
Yeah. Thank you. And Aida, I guess you haven't announced your recent round yet.
So we closed our pre-seed round a couple of months ago. It was about £1 million, and the funding sources was mostly like balance between angels and family office as well as VCs. And I think like the choice was kind of like because it's the first round. We thought that bringing in a strategic investor at an early stage may not necessarily be a smart choice at the beginning, because a lot of advice that we have received that maybe if you have a strategic investor at an early stage, the expectations would be that the same strategic investor would lead in the next round. So it's actually quite better to kind of like focus, I think, at a pre-seed round with VCs as well as angel investors or family offices. And I think we had quite a healthy balance between both because both of them have completely different motivations of why would they want to invest in the company. And
Yeah, and I guess with you, H&M and Bestseller came the second round, so in the kind of seed round.
Yeah, for us it was actually really important to bring strategic investors quite early on in the journey, because they have a very deep understanding of the supply chains that we deal with, the types of timelines involved in the production of novel material and the scaling of these materials and the integration of these material in their product ranges. So having sort of an appreciation for the sort of timelines that are quite uncommon in perhaps other verticals in the VC world was really critical.
And what would you say were the kind of main challenges that you kind of experienced in your fundraising journeys, and also how did you overcome them?
So I think for us, because I think it's a challenge that's specific to DyeRecycle, it was essentially explaining what would be the best business model and the point of integration in the supply chain, because the technologies are quite circular, and we're talking about something that happens quite upstream, which is the dyes and the dyeing, and then something that happens quite downstream, which is the end of life and the recycling. So it was really trying to explain for the investors what would be the business model and trying to model different scenarios of supply chain integration, what would happen and what would be the revenue generation if we integrated it at a vertically integrated manufacturer versus if we integrate the technology in a fiber recycler versus if we did an own and operate model by ourselves. So it was quite important for us to kind of like lay down all these different scenarios and understand what would be the key revenue generation in each one of them. And I think that was like one of the key challenge, but then the other one typically that it's at an early stage of proving that there is significant attraction or at least a tangible attraction from brands or supply chain partners. That was quite important, and I think we were quite lucky because we joined Fashion for Good quite early on in our journey, and that kind of allowed us to have small pilots and proof of concepts and MVPs with brands and fiber recyclers. So that kind of like was more tangible pilots that proved the use of the products and the performance of either the dyes or the fibers as well.
And I guess that's also quite something that you have in common in terms of Fashion for Good.
Yeah, our journey started, I mean, it was really accelerated by the Fashion for Good accelerator, which allowed us to secure some early partnership with potential customers. But I think the two main challenges for us were slightly different. I think echoing what you were talking about earlier, when we started fundraising, fashion wasn't an attractive industry to invest in. For most investors, they didn't really appreciate the need. They didn't appreciate the impact of the industry at the time. And I think a lot has happened over the past few years that has flipped the status quo. The second main challenge for us was that, it's the shiny object syndrome. We deal with cotton, which is ubiquitous, it's taken for granted. And so it was often difficult to convince investors that it was actually an innovative proposition. And the way we approached it was innovative. Because, again, you assume that no matter what store you enter, you'll find cotton on the shelves. And in comparison to other, maybe more fancy, maybe more elaborate, more exotic types of novel materials that use waste streams from other industries, we were just perhaps discredited as, well, just cotton. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's really important to acknowledge that cotton is 25% of all textiles that we use. It directly supports 100 million farmers and their families, and it's inherently circular. So a lot of benefits from a material perspective, from an impact perspective, that we've been able to capitalize on in our journey.
And one other thing that I was thinking actually we should discuss as well in your case is also the importance of grants, kind of to start off, but also in the context of the pre-seed round, there was a grant as part of the investor partnership program that you also had access to. So maybe it would be something interesting to explain to the audience a bit more.
So Innovate UK have a grant scheme that is called the Investor Partnership Program. And essentially there are certain numbers of VCs that is part of this partnership program, where if you were able to secure funding from these VCs, and I think there's like 20 VCs or...
I think now it's actually like it's a quite long list. There are like 100 and 50 kind of VCs that joined, and now there's new rounds for more to join. I think progressively they've been quite successful at it.
Yeah. So with these, so if you were able to secure funds essentially from these VCs, then the Innovate UK basically can match the funding, which is quite great essentially. So you can get match funding from whatever you have secured from these investors. And I think this would be quite of an incredible opportunity for a lot of the innovators to kind of apply for this specific scheme.
And I think the specific scheme up to now, because I think now they will be launched with a new budget. I think so I guess at least in my experience, the success rate has been quite high. So companies apply for a grant first. If they basically are awarded a grant, then the investor can match the grant with kind of investment. And they also had historically underfunding for circular fashion specifically, and other categories like kind of diversity, which I think a lot of founders actually in this space are kind of diverse founders. And it's quite an interesting mechanism, I think, to de-risk the investment for the investors, and also, to support companies, I guess maybe also securing more R&D funding through the grant, so then the investor feel, the investment is the risk, but there's also more funding can be actually spent on R&D activities. So that could be like an interesting program for, the audience kind of look more into. And I guess kind of we discussed a little bit what you've done to date in terms of funding you've raised, and what are you now kind of planning for the future?
Yeah, so we're now actively entering our Series A to radically scale up our ability to produce fully traceable regenerative cotton with measurable impact, which addresses two main needs. One is to fill the innovation gap that exists currently in sourcing for the fashion industry, to massively reduce carbon emissions. And the second is, a rapidly changing legislative landscape for fashion brands as well, which is starting to introduce specific restrictions to do with traceability and supply chain due diligence. So through our services, we can massively de-risk a lot of the supply chains that our partners operate with or within.
And in terms of on your wish list of investors, I mean, considering that at the moment you have sort of, I guess, family office, angels, and kind of strategic investors, what do you think could be interesting, on a good addition to the current mix?
One of the key risks of raising from strategic investors is that they gain too much influence on your board or on your cap table. That's often perceived as a risk to future investors wanting to join. So one thing that we're looking at is actually diversify our cap table a little bit more. What's really encouraging is to see the alliance of Inditex, the H&M Group, TTY, PDS Ventures, and more who come together to co-invest in innovation that they see as promising and that can benefit the entire industry. So that's something that we're actively looking at. Now, our work focuses primarily on scaling regenerative cotton at the moment, but we've been also working on hydroponics for some time now. For more CapEx and OpEx heavy types of innovation, we're actually probably going to be looking more at debt financing, which might be more suitable than venture capital to scale our production.
Thank you. And I mean, I know you just closed your pre-seed round, but how do you think your kind of future funding pathway will look like?
I mean, they always say as a founder, you never I don't know if you agree or not, you never stop fundraising, but I think it is not necessarily true. I mean, at the moment, as you said, because we just closed the round, so it's more like onto the building mode rather than fundraising mode, but it's always in the background, essentially. And because you're building toward this next funding round, essentially, because the milestones that you have to set have to be in alignment of what you will be presenting in order to actually unlock the next funding round. So they're actually quite linked. So for us at the moment, the two proving points that we have to do in order to go to the next funding round would be around building more concrete partnerships as well as a scalability of the technology and showing that the technology can scale. So these are the two important things that we are working on, and I think that knowing now how long the funding round actually takes, which is approximately 9 months, I would say. So it was a good learning experience to kind of like plan for the next one.
Yeah, so start like...
in 9 months start another
Because that's
one.
also the reality is that, you know, the time you have to reach the critical milestones is actually runway minus the time to actually, you know, I don't know, 9 to 12 months in advance before you're actually kind of running out of cash. Yeah.
Always raise more than you need, because you will run out of money. I mean, the clock is ticking constantly. So yeah.
And then I guess this brings to the next question more about, guess what advice would you give to the audience, or what also you wish you had known when you started this journey?
Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge for anyone looking to raise money at the moment is that the landscape has changed quite dramatically over the past 2 years or so. I think investors tend to be a lot more risk averse today. Valuations have tanked massively for various reasons. So I think the first thing is get used to it. You might have had grand ambition for your company based on 2021 sort of valuation and investment rounds. That might need to be reframed slightly. One other thing is try and learn the love language of your investors. Climate tech investors, nature tech investors are going to typically speak a different language to institutional VCs. They'll have different expectations, different kind of, different expectations. I think fundamentally raising funds is a numbers game. So yes, you always want to be fundraising, but at the same time, it's so draining and resource intensive that ideally you want to raise as much money as possible so that you can focus on development and then do a concerted push when you need to, because you'll be talking to dozens, if not hundreds, of investors who will all say no, apart from a handful, which is all you need, really. So, yeah, I guess.
And I guess maybe expanding more on the kind of climate tech investor language, because I think it's actually a big universe of investors that are now getting into fashion. I guess what are the kind of key common things that you see that they look for, like the 1 gigaton reduction?
I mean, yes, we're not targeting climate tech investors directly because there's typically sort of a big emphasis on carbon reductions. Through our work, we aim to have more of a holistic impact, taking into account biodiversity, water management, land stewardship, and social impact. So I guess we're focusing more on nature tech and strategics. I think more and more what's interesting is to see how profitable growth as a concept is starting to permeate into the VC world, as opposed to just relentless growth at all costs that was seen perhaps 4 or 5 years ago. So that's interesting.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And Aida, to you, what advice would you give to
playbook?
Yes, your playbook.
I think if you're especially if it's like the first funding round, you have to be comfortable that you're gonna do mistakes no matter what, how many advices you've received. It's still like everybody's funding round is completely different, and I think you just have to kind of live with this kind of reality, I would say. And I think, as I said, because this is the first time, I think one of the key things is not to be shy to kind of shop around and get multiple term sheets from multiple investors at the first time. I mean, it's quite hard, but if you can, why not? And the second part, I think it would be actually speaking to other founders. I think is something that I didn't do, which I wish I did more of, to speak to other founders actually and try to learn from their experience, and particularly in your space, because we're probably talking to the same investors, all of us. So there is really no reason to shy and be like, because sometimes people can take this quite sensitively, and I think there is no reason for that. So yeah, I wish I did this more.
Yeah, actually, all innovators are talking to the same investors, and all investors are talking to each other
yeah, exactly.
about the same innovators. So everyone is talking about everyone.
Yeah, and also everyone is also talking to the same brands
Yeah,
as well,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
suppliers, so it's a quite small world, so yes.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, yeah, I was thinking about two more things. Lawyer up early on. I think that's a very practical recommendation, because it's in the investor's interest to try and get as much as possible from you, and you might not be in a position to know how to protect yourself from that. Another one is good to recognize that FOMO is what drives most investors. So try and you were talking about shopping around for these term sheets. I mean, you have to
build the hype.
Yeah, exactly. Channel the hype and make them feel like
don't be immature, don't.
Actually, kind of in the spirit of Leeds' way of communication, try and not be too British when you pitch yourself. Try and really embody the contrarian kind of spirit, because you need that. Investors fuel off your weaknesses to try and take as much as they can from you. So I mean, often we're told to be a bit more American when we pitch, but. Let's just use the Leeds example for now.
Yeah. And do you have any specific advice, more, you're kind of a spin out from Imperial College in terms of, specific challenges, maybe in kind of companies that start in a research university setting that you think?
I think like typically university spin-outs it might be actually more challenging for them to raise investment, opposite to common belief maybe, and that's because there are multiple reasons around that. But I think like we were quite lucky that we didn't face necessarily this challenge. But yeah, like.
But kind of like, even in that context, kind of, the, I guess, structure that are put forward, they're always open for negotiation.
Yeah, so I think that's quite important, because basically when the investors comes in and it's a university spin-out, which basically means that the university has some ownership in the company, I think these things can be always renegotiated. So there's nothing that cannot be renegotiated, essentially. So even if like something that was done quite early on, and once investors join on board, there's always a room to kind of like go back and restructure the cap table. That also goes back to your lawyering up at an early stage. It's quite important to get this advice from a lawyer.
Yeah.
And
what also you were saying about talking to other founders, because it's also not uncommon to discover that spin-outs coming from the same university might have actually negotiated different terms. As well.
Every clause in your agreement will be a point of leverage. So literally everything is up for grabs. So
yeah, cool. So I don't know if we have more time that we could move. 5 minutes, so we could actually move into some Q&A from the audience. Yeah.
There's microphones just get a microphone. I'll tell you what, while we're waiting, I'll ask the first question.
Okay.
Which is, because I think some people might be thinking this. Well, I was. Did you meet? How did you meet Irene, or did Irene meet you? How did you find each other?
Because John was not the first person I met in Materra.
I think one of the first times we met, we were having pizza in my flat in South London, and me and my friends were hand ginning cotton that we had recently harvested from our research facility in the UK, and I think that kind of set the tone for what was to come.
Because I was basically so I know how so one of my colleagues at Sustainable Ventures told me, I met a super cool sustainable cotton startup, you will love them, from Imperial College. And then I kind of then met the other two co-founders, Ed and Ed. And that was their mentor and helped them raise their kind of pre-seed round. And then Ed, who's the CEO, and I used to live close in Peckham. And we didn't really know that. So once, I think, because we started working during lockdown, then as soon as you could see someone outside, and we started having like business walking meetings, basically, like, and fast walking meet. So and that's, I guess, yeah.
So, if someone in the audience now has an amazing innovation, an amazing business idea, they might not live in Peckham. They might live in Leeds, right? What would you advise them to do, Irene?
It depends on the stage that they are at. But I mean, my advice to companies is always to try to leverage as much money as you can from grant funding. I guess I kind of worked, Carbon Trust, then Sustainable Ventures. I'm used to have an extremely high success rate with grants, especially for the more hardware technologies. Materra is a bit of a weird case study because of the farm. No, in the sense that, they should have been able to get more grants, but with many grants competition, farming is excluded. And also if you are, the cotton is farmed also in India, there's always been reasons why, a lot of grant funding calls were not actually open. But, companies like DyeRecycle is a perfect example. You could actually get, a lot of grant funding and leverage on that. And, many of the companies you also work with. I worked for a wastewater treatment technology that we got like around 10 million in grants, never had to fundraise. They also had 2 high net worth individuals that kind of sustained the business. But, they won every single grant you can think about.
Okay.
So
try and do a bit of de-risking to prove the principle, make sure that that the idea works properly, perhaps before you start seeking private
even
investment.
when you're seeking funding, use the grants in a clever way to do the R&D, make it look like it's R&D you wouldn't do without the grants, but actually you would do it anyway. I mean, in I hope you're not in the room, but it's kind of, because it is R&D at the end of the days, and then if you get a grant, you can actually, build a proper team, and, it's very, and also that's what public funding should support, all companies making a positive impact, and especially the hardware technology, so there's never enough R&D funding.
Okay, sorry.
Hey guys, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I also met Irene in Peckham, so my advice is move to Peckham if you want to get support from Irene. I was wondering, you were talking about, having, raised the pre-seed. Congrats, amazing. And you mentioned, all of you, about needing to hit those kind of critical milestones in order for that next round of funding. So once you've raised this round, you're already planning for that next round. I wondered, on a very practical level, how you went about setting those critical milestones for the next round. Like, who did you talk to? Were you talking to investors saying, hey, what would we need to achieve in order for you to lead the next round or invest again? Or was it about what your customers were saying? I'd love to understand how you set that critical path so that when you come to the next round that you're going to be nailing it.
Setting goals is probably one of the hardest things you have to do when you run your startup, especially in the early stages, because your customers don't know what you have to offer necessarily, and they don't know how it's going to benefit them necessarily until and unless it's real and tangible. So you have to be super adaptive to changes in the market, changes in the signals you're getting from your customers. But ultimately, it's customers first, because your first key proof point is product market fit to enter sort of seed Series A territory. So customers first. Investors are a good source of support for that, although they have an agenda, and so you need to be aware of where their biases lie. On top of that, you very practically, you want to show to your investors or to investors that you know what you're doing. So you might not want to be overly transparent with them, with your doubts and that's what I would say.
Thank you.
First of all, Materra, amazing what you're doing. Following you and Ed, brilliant. And the dye people, fantastic. I just wanted to ask, what percentage of your funding and investment is from the UK? Because it's bestseller, H&M, PDS. It's not UK investors. Did you struggle at all, or have you got UK investors?
We do have UK investors, although they are sort of a much smaller proportion of our cap table. The fashion industry and supply chains are global, right? So depending on which tier you're operating in, you're probably going to have to start looking internationally at investors who really understand the industry that you're working in.
All our investments coming from overseas as well. We've really struggled in the UK. That's why I was asking.
Yeah,
whether you're finding the same.
Yeah, so our main customer base is Western Europe and the US in terms of brands and groups. So typically, they have the investors in these geographies know the customers and can understand sort of the traction that we're getting from them. So I think, I guess to some extent matching the customer base and the investor base kind of makes sense.
And I find with UK investors agree with this is also I kind of come across maybe on the cap table of companies a lot of like individuals, maybe like founders of there are certain names that come up like their family office, and usually people that worked in retail set up New Look or kind of companies like that, and then invest in this space because they understand it. But yes, it's mostly international investors.
Okay, just one final question. Thank you. Yeah, just Ben. Thank you.
Hi. If you guys had the ability to speak to Innovate directly without them knowing who you were, how can they improve their offering? So what I'm saying, in the early days, you applied to competitions and you had to fit your concept into their guidelines. Mm-hmm. How could they get better?
Don't worry, we do have UKRI in the room, but don't worry. But they're very nice people, don't worry.
I was also joking,
I don't. One way they could get better is being very, very transparent about what they're looking for in the innovation that they would be subsidizing. In our case, I suspect that part of the challenges for Materra raising grant funding from Innovate is that we are an international startup. Actually, most of our staff is in India because that's where the supply chain is, that's where the farming is. Only a small part of our team is in the UK. And I think that creates some sort of misalignment with what Innovate stands for. But I don't know for sure. So actually having a bit more transparency on that level would be helpful in us also just tailoring our proposition.
But yeah, in that context, because it's very easy to do, the UK, when you have to explain why Materra can generate value for, the UK economy and the UK government, you can definitely, do that. It's also kind of a UK company with an Indian subsidiaries, but then also, especially in the context of fashion, even when there are like grant funding where companies have to, at the end of the day, build a product at the end of it. We're talking about, fiber kind of traveling around the world, getting into yarn fabrics, and okay, maybe you can do a small R&D project here in the UK, but simply there's no supply chain here to do certain things and work with most of the customers that are international. So fashion is a bit different than maybe, the way of some of these rules, like, no farming is included, or, the supply chain has to be in the UK. They can make it harder for companies in fashion, and Materra is not the only example I know about. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Irene, John, Aida.
Thank you
very much.